Welcome everybody to our Wabakimi Trip Planning Basics webinar. This will be a little bit different than normal because we're going to have multiple presenters throughout the presentation. I am MJ and I'll be moderating and sometimes participating in on the discussion. We have Beth Roush, who's going to be monitoring the chat room. If you at any time during the presentation have questions or comments that you can offer to the group in response to things we're talking about, please feel free to do that in the chat room, and Beth will call attention to it. Okay, so now in order for you, if you want to be able to see who's speaking, go up to your view button and pull it down and switch to speaker view. Otherwise, you might have to go searching for the person if that's what you want to see. I am going to have some slides up on the screen that I'll be sharing in just a moment, and hopefully all of them are what the speakers really wanted, because I went fishing for some of those on my own, so we'll see how they match. And let's see, was there another one? This is hosted, and the people who are the speakers tonight are from the Expedition Committee, and we jointly came up with this program for tonight. And one of the things that I wanted to, two things that I wanted to mention to everybody here while I have a captive audience from the Expedition Committee is that we do have a group of people from the Expedition Committee that have volunteered to be trip consultants. And those, if questions are posed to the FOW through our website, through email, then Dave forwards that on to me, and I forward it on to trip consultants, and everyone replies as they feel they can contribute. And that's been going very well, and we've had a good positive response from those that have asked questions and gotten feedback. So just keep that in mind. If you've got particular questions about a route or something or a recommendation, go ahead and ask us. And the second thing is we are trying to encourage self-guided reconnaissance trips, especially this year on the western side, Savant Lake area, because we're looking for additional information on that area. We have been in the process of looking at our maps and our past information, and we're trying to correct things that we have, update them, or just get new information on parts that we don't have. So just consider that in your travel discussions. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share the screen and get started here. In this presentation, I guess there's one thing I forgot to mention is if you haven't muted yourself, please do so. So check that out, so we're not hearing discussions or dog barking in the background or something. And for presenters, when it's your turn, I'll try to remind you to unmute. All right, so we're going to be talking about, what are some of the first things, or what are the things that we think about when we start planning a trip, and in particular with Wabakimi. And then we're also going to be, and that covers a lot of areas. And then we'll get into what resources we have that you could use for that, maps and other resources. We'll talk a little bit about entry points and exit points and ways to access it. And then, as I said before, we're suggesting trips on the west side if you can consider it. Just in case there's anybody in this call that doesn't know where Wabakimi Provincial Park is, it's right up here north of Thunder Bay, about 3.5 hours north, and Armstrong is the town that is probably a big hub for going into Wabakimi on the side of the area. So we are going to cover these items tonight, and we're going to start with Dawn tonight. Dawn, what do you do when you are looking to start a trip?
Well, the first thing I do is as I'm driving home from my current trip, I'm already thinking about the following trip for the following year, or usually it's only one big trip a year. And when I get home, I take out my big map, whether it's Boundary Waters, backpacking out west, or now my favorite, Wabakimi. Yeah, I look at that map and determine, for starters, and I've got a plus because I do all my planning. I have always done it from starting in 1977. I'm always the trip planner because I know it's going to happen. I don't rely on anybody else. But once I find who else is going, then they become part of it too. But and I determine how many days. Usually mine are from 10 days to 14 days. And then I look at the map and go, okay, how far can I go? The older I get, the doesn't seem like I put on over my 100 miles now, but I still get out there quite a ways. So yeah, the big map is the big thing. So if you don't have one of those, that's where you should start. And just a matter of who's going to go with you, but you know that when wintertime comes, you can hash that out. But once again, the number of days is key, and how aggressive you want to be to, you know, how many miles or kilometers you want to put on, and how remote you want to get. I try to get off the beaten path. So I see very few people then.
Got a text from Brooke. She wants me to come up, walk over and look at Lydia's ear. She's got a rash around her ear.
So anyhow, yeah, so that's basically my trip planning. Is it starts there, and once I get it onto from the big map, then I break it down into the smaller maps and kind of go from there.
Okay, excellent. Don, if you would mute, and would everyone please check their whether or not they're muted, and make sure that you are, unless you're the speaker. Otherwise, we get little dips of conversations in the background. So thank you. Dave, you're next to talk about what types of trips do people consider, and you know, how do they set their expectations or their goals?
Well, kind of following on what Don had to say, you know, you have to determine how many days you have available. I've noticed a lot of typical Wabakimi trips are anywhere from 8 to 14 days, like he said, or longer in some cases. Some of us like shorter trips. I've done a number of shorter trips. It helps if you're like in the immediate area, since it takes quite a bit of travel just to get to Wabakimi by plane or train or road. But there are shorter trips available, and I've done at least 4 shorter trips in the last couple of years, and I have a couple of YouTube reports on our website that talk about some of those with entries nearer to Armstrong's or Savant Lake. So you need to determine you know, how many miles or kilometers a day you think you can travel, whether you want a slow, relaxed, or a fast pace, whether you're a travel canoeer where you want to get up and paddle as far as you can every day, or whether you want to do like I do, which is paddle one day and base camp and explore the next day in my perfect world. And then there's the time of year you like to paddle. Some people like to paddle in August. Some people like to paddle with bugs in June. I like to do the shoulder seasons, either early before the bugs or late August into September, which is probably what I'm going to do this year. And then there's the issue of portage conditions. If you're inside the park, you may be on well-traveled routes like the Flint or the Allen Water River routes where the portages get more use and they're maintained by the park. You'll notice on our planning map, we've differentiated the park maintained routes from the historic routes. And not to say that those historic routes don't get used, but not the same kind of use that maybe the routes in the park do. Like the Flint or the Allen Water are frequently traveled routes. Some people take the Bright Sand down to the Kopka. That's another route that gets some usage. But if you're in Crown Lands, we did a trip on the Atwood River as Ken Babinchak can share. There was one portage where he counted over 50 step overs on a portage that had been cleared like 6 years previously. So you have to take that into account. And then you have to factor in your expectations about remoteness. If you're on some of the lakes that have outposts, you're entirely possibly be running into an occasional motorboat and people fishing. So that's a factor. There's routes where you can go where you won't see hardly anybody. We went up the Nemo last September and we encountered one other canoe. So that was a route. As far as we went, we didn't see a lot of other people. And then, what is your primary interest? Are you doing this for fishing or wildlife or scenery or exploration? We have Vern Fish who likes to go where no one else has gone and in interesting areas and explore. So what's your primary interest? Is it scenery? Is it exploration, fishing? And last, you have to kind of think about the cost of all of this. Flights can be more expensive. Shuttles can cost some money. Lodging to factor in. So these are a lot of things that go into determining, I think, what kind of trip you want. If you run down the list, you get some idea, and then you can go from there.
Okay, very good. Thanks, Dave. Before we go on to Bill, Beth, I see that there might be some chat things. I haven't viewed them. I just see a number. So is there anything that you need to bring up?
Just a reminder that this is being recorded and it'll be available on the web page later if you cannot stay or want to refer to it. Also, Glenn has a really good comment to remember to put in layover days for fatigue, weather, the plane can't get in, injury. We're going to talk a little more about injury and extraction. But a good rule of thumb is generally at least a day per 7 days, 2 to 3 days per a 2-week trip. Thank you.
Good, thanks. Those are good additions. All right, Bill, we're going to move on to you, and you're going to talk a little bit about the time of year.
Yes, thank you. I'll try to give you a little overview. You may be lucky enough to be able to pick your time of year that you like the best, but some people are locked into certain times. So I'll try to give you an overview about what the canoeing season might look like at various months during the year. First of all, I like daylight. And as you go from mid-May until mid-June, of course, when you have the longest day, the daylight changes from about 17 useful hours of light to about 18 hours on the summer solstice. Now this, I figured in about 40 to 45 minutes every day of twilight in the morning and 45 minutes in the evening. So on June 21st, of course, you have about 60 and a half hours of daylight, but add an hour and a half of twilight time, you come up with about the 18 hours. So I figure the canoeing season goes from mid-May until about the 3rd week in September. And some of the pictures you're looking at there, you see the gentleman swimming in the lake. That occurred about the 23rd of May. in 2010. The picture below that is about the 26th of May, and that's the snow on the ground. So I've encountered snow out of 10 years. In late May, I've been snowed on with measurable snow 2 times. So you have to make sure that you are, adequately dressed, long underwear, and even into June, I take long underwear, and obviously in September also. So you have to make sure that you are dressed for the potential seasons you might encounter. So mid-May, this fishing season starts on the 17th of May. That's this year, the 3rd Saturday. And if the ice is out and the fish are biting, that's usually a good time to start. So if you like to fish, it's usually the best starting the 3rd week in May, going all the way into June. You'll have fewer bugs, of course, starting out after ice out for about 2 weeks. And depends on the year, you might have early spring in which you'll have bugs coming out there in the 3rd week of May for sure. It's a lot of fun to watch the leaves on the birch and poplar trees and the alders open up in May. The songbirds arrive, especially the white-throated sparrows. The frogs start chirping there, usually by the 1st week in June. The flowers start. I've even seen lady slippers in the 3rd week in May, which was the same year that you see the gentleman swimming there in the lake. So that was a very early spring. So generally, as Dave said, the most bugs are in June. Fishing is great. The weather is warming, but thunderstorms can be strong. The strongest thunderstorms are actually in June and July. Also in June, the water is still high. It's highest in May after of course, the thaw. Longest days are in June. Lots of flowers are in bloom. In July, you'll have the hottest weather. You can swim and bathe comfortably in the water most of the time. Fishing is still good. Usually the sport fishing outpost camps are less busy as the season goes into July. In August, of course, you get the great blueberries. I'm not lucky enough to have been there in August. I hope to do that sometime, but that's the main thing people report about August. They love the blueberry harvest. The best stargazing, I think, is also probably in August when you have the meteor showers. It's actually it's the driest month. August is in the summertime itself. So swimming is still the best. And there's Maurice in September. Minimum bugs, great fall colors, less rain, but the fishing slows down. And from my experience, most songbirds have already left, but the migration of waterfowl is just getting started. One year I experienced watching thousands of sandhill cranes on their way south. Shorter days to travel, of course, and colder temperatures will obviously start. So if you're lucky enough to go when you want to do the experience, the best of the weather, you can do that. If you'd like to fish, you do it early. And as Ken said, build in a travel day. Do you happen to have that wind video there?
Oh, wait a minute. I've got the video for the planner. I don't know about a wind video, but I do have, hold on a second. I do have this chart.
Oh, I think maybe Dan, yeah, I put that chart together. Just kind of shows what I summarized.
Yep.
The green is the precipitation, and the green is in millimeters. So obviously June and July, it's the most rain, and the averages are 4 to 4.5 inches in May and June, or in June and July actually. But you can't count on the averages. The temperatures vary from, highs of 73 average, but yet the highest temperature it can get, the record is like 35 C, which is about 94, 95 degrees in July. So I always plan for the worst. So don't take the averages of what you're going to get. Hopefully you won't get the worst. That's all I have to say there, MJ.
Okay, awesome.
The video I had for the wind was just the horrendous. As they plan a layover day, don't box yourself into a corner because you have to build that in. And the videos that I've seen, the ones I've taken, it's just like you're at the end of a hurricane or during a hurricane with these big storms that go through, and they set in for a day or more. The low pressure systems seem to get there and stall out, and Lake Nipigon is so large that there's kind of like its own weather system right there sometimes.
Very good. Yeah, so you get a lot of white caps on those and can't move. Awesome. All right, let's see. I'm going to be moving to Dan and Beth about the challenges, but before I do that, Beth, are there some other comments or questions?
I believe Beth is still on mute.
Sorry, there we go. Ken is pointing out it can get very hot. It can be wet and cold, and in the same week, it can hit 90 degrees. So you have to pack accordingly and dress in layers. Wabakimi storms, I'm sure we'll talk about that, but they can be pretty intense. And it tends to be a wet park as opposed to woodland caribou, which is catching the western winds and fires. And Wabakimi is wetter. I've heard people say, and my experience has been, it's like this boreal tropical forest. It's so mossy and wet.
Which is kind of to our advantage. All righty. It beeps at, there we go. Okay. Dan and Beth, why don't you guys talk a little bit about how to decide about those challenges that come up?
Did you want to go first, Beth?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to bring up about last year's weather with the, I don't know if any folks got up there last year, but with the high water and Boundary Waters, Quetico, and also just that whole watershed area, Wabakimi was really affected by that high water. And I was on 2 different spring trips. And one of the things that high water was brought into the mix made it really hard to find portages. And we spent a lot of extra time looking for portages because the water was way into the woods. And so you just couldn't find that pathway. It'd just be channels of water. And I just found that slowed up a lot of our trip work, and really affected the second spring trip on the Raymond, where we really had difficulties and spent sometimes an hour or 2 trying to find the portage area. So I just wanted to bring that up, that if you do get into conditions like that, hopefully you can kind of plan into your trip that can really slow things up a lot. I mean, you can lose days when you start losing 3 hours here, 2 hours there. So just kind of think about that, especially in the more remote areas where the portages aren't that great in the first place. So they can be pretty tricky to find at times. I think in the more traveled areas, it's not. I think when we were on the Nemo, it was all pretty simple to find all the portages, and they were in great shape. But up in the Raymond, it was a different story, and kind of got ourselves into some trouble on that. So I just wanted to make that a point of when you're setting up a trip, that the more remote you get, you've got to really look at the wild cards, that you may lose time, and to have those layover days built in. And then also just with portages up there, just a lot of people are always just looking at the length, the distance of the portages. And really, I just don't think that the length is not as much the enemy as just the extreme rises and falls. And so if you can look at your topo maps when you're planning things and to see those areas that, hey, you may have ridges and stuff that you're going to climb into. And another thing that those ridges will bring for you is deadfalls. That's where you're going to find areas where there's a lot of trees down. A lot of times if you're in flat, swampy area, it'll stay together pretty well and you can make time. But when you start climbing ridges in Wabakimi, I've found that just you can be into areas that'll have 50 trees down in a hurry, and it can really slow your progress up. So I guess that's what I had it for notes from what happened last year, and I thought would be important for folks that are going into that area for maybe a first time.
Awesome. How about you, Beth?
Thanks. Yeah, just to echo what Dan said, and I made a note in chat. It's important to bring a saw. There is blowdown, and even conditions can change rapidly. If this is your first trip to Wabakimi, it's important to realize that if you are taking a route that is less traveled, there may be significant blowdown within a couple years' time. The top center photo is my now retired old yellow canoe that we were dragging most of the way because the overhead clearance was really limited. So we were reduced to dragging the boats. And this was a portage, correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, but I think Dan had gone through and cleared this 6 years earlier. So you can see, and this was early summer, so there wasn't all the leafy growth yet. And this was not even in the park. This was on crown land surrounding the park. The picture on the upper right is a hammock suspended directly over a portage, because that was like the most cleared area you could get. And then the blaze that you look for, that was that tree's probably 150 years old, and then that blaze is however old, but those are the things you kind of look for.
Beth, correct. I'm going to add in here because I remember somebody saying that the blazes are a really big help, but if they're a tree that got downed, they're not much help. You might not be able to see them. Was that an experience you had at all?
Yeah, that was an experience I had in the more well-traveled part of the park. There was a very large tree with a very large blaze, but it was laying in the water. So you look for signs of trace. You look for cut marks. You may see some flagging tape, or you may see a rock cairn. And then this also brings up, I think we're going to talk about that in a little bit too, but trace in a wilderness, and how do you navigate that? And obviously we're not bringing saws and leaving blazes in the boundary waters, but in this type of provincial park, the blazes can make or break a difference of finding a portage.
Okay, thank you. And you're kind of with me on the next one, Beth. And that, will we see people? And I think this was briefly mentioned earlier. What has been your experience with seeing people up there?
Well, that's a great question. I talked to a fellow at Canoecopia who was very upset that he had paid a lot of money to fly in and have this wilderness experience, and went over some grueling portages, got onto a lake, and there was a motorboat fishing and a great big modern lodge. And our planning map has the outposts marked on it. You may find a situation where you're glad that you found an outpost for shelter or for a radio, or it may really kind of harsh your mellow too. So I think be aware of the park is used, it is motorized, and there are First Nations people that depend on it for their life. There are people who go there for sport fishing and fly in and fly out. And then there are people like wilderness paddlers that like the solitude and the remote. There are well-traveled areas in the park where you probably will see people, and there are areas that are not well-traveled. And then there are certainly the perimeter crown lands, where on one trip with Dan and Vern, we saw nobody for days. And on our second trip in the middle of the park, we only saw one other person, one other group, but you probably will see people, especially if it's your first trip and you stick to some of the better known places to put in and access the park. What's been your experience, MJ?
Well, for the most part, when I did trips up there, there was nobody, never saw a soul. But last year, unexpectedly, when 4 of us went onto Cliff Lake, we arrived and there were like 6 people on one site, and then a couple of days later, we saw 2 people traveling through, and it was like a big surprise. You know, not distractingly so, but still a big surprise. So I guess what you're saying is if you're expecting remoteness, you got to kind of pay attention to where you're going and what might be there. And you're going to want to do the less traveled places if you are going to want nobody around. So
I think too, just keep in mind, you know, seeing a person, another group of paddlers shouldn't necessarily ruin your trip. I think what ruins a trip, for me anyway, is the pressure to get to a campsite by 11 in the morning. And that is not the situation in Wabakimi. And that for me really opened up a whole new world, that you can paddle all day long as you want, go wherever, whenever you want to, and you don't have to worry that you are literally going to be racing to get a campsite. And that to me is just the gem quality of this experience in this park that we're so lucky to be able to access.
very true, very true. Do you want to look real quick at the chat to see if there's anything else in there before we
I
move
do.
on?
Ken is making some really good remarks here. So there are mining claims in the park, and you need to be careful when you're portaging that you pay very attention to the trail and stay, as you know, focused on the waterway ahead of you. If you find out that you are facing a tree with 4 blazes, it's the center of the mining claim and you're off trail. The other thing that really can mess you up are the moose trails. And my best advice about that is just really be looking for moose scat. And if you're going off on a trail, this happened on our May trip, if you are starting to see a lot of scat, you might be on a game trail. So those are a real thing. Thank you, Ken.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, Vern, you're going to be up next. You might have your own stuff, but this is the slide I put in for you.
Okay, well, if you'll let me share the screen,
You go right ahead.
see how that works. This will stop this will stop you. And hopefully, let's see how this works. If you got a screen in front of you, MJ?
Yes.
All right, well, I'm Debbie Downer here. I'm talking about paddling emergency preparation, or I call it PEP. And I guess what I always ask people is, are you really ready? And the reason that I've really gotten focused on this is that in the last 3 to 5 years, I've had to do 3 emergency exits and a couple of non-emergency exits, and one of them was for me. I had a fainting episode and I had to come out early on a trip. So I'm very focused on you know, how do you prepare for that kind of stuff? So a real quick summary of this, real quick example. Maybe this has happened to you. Ryan. Oh no, 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 no. Oh shit. Yeah, are you really ready? Are you really ready for the worst that can happen out there in the backcountry? I had a mentor that kept me alive and showed me how to survive in the backcountry. And he always had an expression in the morning: let's not do anything stupid today. And so I've kind of added that to my emergency planning concept. And one of the things that I consider stupid, and I'll be blunt and say it, is not wearing a life jacket. So putting on that life jacket and wearing it is not being stupid. And obviously alcohol is, to me, is just a major no-no. Those are just 2 things you don't want to do that, because they'll get you in trouble. But there's some other things going on there. And if you've never seen a pin boat, if you've never had your boat pinned, you learn to expect the unexpected. So that's part of that emergency planning, is expect the unexpected. Also, if you've ever had an injury on a trip, you kind of wish, God, I wish I'd taken that first aid class. I wish I'd brought that first aid equipment. I could have had some more training and how to do a back ferry. So practice your skills so that you can respond effectively when it counts. You know, whatever, there's a lot of skills go into paddling, you know, paddling a straight line, dealing with a broken toe in this case, twisted ankle. Do you have the right equipment? Have you done the right training? Do you know what to do? And then to me, one of the most important things is your procedures and policies, the things that you do to prepare your group to bring everybody home safely. I've become very aware of that as a result of teaching a class to community college kids. I want to bring all those kids back. And so I have established some systems and some habits and some checklists to prevent emergencies, Some of the more common reasons why search and rescue teams go out: errors in judgment. You can count the number of people in that boat. I bet that's past the limit. And you can also count how many life jackets are out there. That's a problem. That's an error in judgment. Fatigue, just being totally exhausted. That's a problem. Inefficient equipment or experience. This is one of my Hawkeye kids who didn't bring enough clothes, and this way he came to breakfast because he was so dang cold he couldn't get up in the morning. Falls, just falling and getting hurt. And finally, the weather. These are the things that can cause you to have to do an emergency exit. Now, there are 3 strikes that I can go into, but I don't have time here. I'm only going to talk about one of them. And let's take a quick example of that. Inexperience and complicity. The vast majority of paddlers that have to be brought out have less than 100 hours of experience, and those make up 74% of the paddling victims. However, experienced paddlers with sloppy safety habits can also become victims. And so establish system, habits, and checklists to prevent emergencies, such as 1, know your navigational charts, know all the hazards of the area you're going into. But the other thing that I've really become an advocate for is putting together a list of equipment that you need and updating that list frequently. You notice the date on this is in December 22. I just updated this last December. Some of the stuff that's on here is the group gear, a pin kit. We'll talk about that a little bit more. Cook kit, repair kit, first aid kit, bear bag, water jugs, permits, poles, throw bags. Those are all things that should be part of your equipment. You may never use them, but boy, when you need that throw bag, you wish you had it with you. Life jacket, to me, that's part of my safety gear. Not only does it keep me afloat, but it has a whistle on it. Beth made reference to walking down a moose trail and getting lost. Knife, camera, compass, matches, and then probably very critically, my satellite phone is right there. If I get swept out of the boat, I can survive for a while and get a hold of people. That life jacket is critical. In addition to that, cold water bag. If you've ever had somebody go into hypothermia on it, do you have dry clothes that you can put them into really fast? And for better or worse, I've had that happen to multiple people I paddle with, and it's happened to me. So I carry that right where I can get to it. That's part of my checklist. So have you ever had to deal with this? Have you ever had a pin canoe? Have you ever practiced a pulley system? Do you carry a pin kit? You know, most of us never have that happen, but I've had it happen to me. And we found this boat on Lower Pecos River in Southwest Texas. And we never did find the people that were in it. They walked out because they didn't have a pin kit. They couldn't get the boat pulled off. This is an example of preparing and carrying the right equipment. So what I always ask people, what's in your repair kit? Do you have a pin kit in there? Do you have tape? What are you carrying with you? Can you fix? Do you have a multi-tool that you can fix stuff? Are you carrying the stuff you need to get home? And then finally, probably the most important thing is my planning chart. And what this basically boils down to is it has all the information for everybody on the trip, including their in-reach communication. It also tells me about their medical histories. In my case, I have high blood pressure, fainting, and I snore. But I've also gone through wilderness first aid training, and I have swift water experience. So for everybody on this trip, we've got all this information there. We also have the contact information for our outfitter. We have our local emergency contact so that we can get a hold of somebody if we get in trouble. And the person who's back home who's looking at this is our guardian angel. And in this case, it's Lisa Otto, who, if we get in trouble, I will contact her through my inReach. She can contact the authorities. She can get a plane or get help, get somebody in there. If one of the friends and family of the crew needs to talk to one of the people on the trip, Lisa is the one who can coordinate that. And when we've had to do emergency exits, the guardian angel is the person that made those emergency exits seem relatively simple and easy, and we got people out without any problem. But it's because we had somebody back home and we have process and a procedure in place. So back to let's not do anything stupid. Wear your life jacket. Don't drink. Expect the unexpected. Plan for the unexpected. Train and practice your skills. Make sure you've got what it takes to be in the backcountry, and have systems and procedures in place. And very importantly, have an in-reach satellite phone and know how to use it to prevent an emergency. Are you ready for your next emergency? I'm done. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Vern.
MJ, we had a good question. Vern, you are a person who loves to share. How would a person access your gear list?
I can, we can post it on our website. I guess I could get that to Dave McTeague and we get that information posted if somebody would like to have that stuff.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, thanks, Vern, and thanks, Beth. Okay, we're going to move on to some resources you might want to know about, and these are either all on our website or will be on our website soon. But the most recent new addition is our new version of the planning map, which kind of combines some things from, you saw a brief picture of that earlier, and I can't remember if I've got another picture of it here or not. Yes, I do. Anyway, this is brand new, and it's revised from our old planning map. Plus, we took into consideration things that we knew personally from trip reports and so forth that have changed. And we also consulted with park officials and got their information and put it into the planning map. So it's a new and improved, great resource. And I think as Dawn had mentioned first thing in this webinar, it's one of the first things you might want to pull out to decide on a trip. We also have relatively new is our Wabakimi Canoe Routes, which we hope to build on. This is organized in terms of routes and kind of a few more of the traveled routes. And there are some maps in here and as well as some descriptions, and it's a very good resource. Plus, these aren't all of them. These are just the only ones I had handy. There are some additional resources that we have that date back to the Wabakimi project. Excellent resource to give you detailed information. And then we'll learn more about these other maps here down the line. This is the planning map, and we put in some new information in here, such as, well, the routes that are in here. I think Dave mentioned that we've kind of differentiated between the historical routes and the routes that are more maintained. We also made sure to put in the train as it goes through. And so forth, and so it's been updated dramatically, and I think you'll like that as a result. And our canoe guidebook again is a really good resource as well. All of those things can be found on our webpage for maps, and you can purchase them right off of there. Bill, I'm going to go back to you to talk about the resource of Paddle Planner as something that you have used to help out in your planning.
Yes, thanks, MJ. Paddle Planner is a business sponsor for the Friends of Wabakimi, so I want to plug them for that. But I think what they have is a powerful planning tool, and I've used it some. I'm not an expert, but I've watched a lot of the videos, tutorials that Paddle Planner has both on YouTube and on their website. There are 4 levels of membership, and you can go on the website and use Paddle Planner for free to do a simple point-to-point route plan. And 2 years ago, Jay from Paddle Planner did a YouTube webinar, did a webinar with the Friends of Wabakimi. And it's about an hour long, and that's the longest video that I've seen. It's the tutorial, but he was doing that for us, explaining his Paddle Planner. He has other videos that range from, I think we're going to show one that's 2 minutes and 22 seconds here, just to have him. This was available on YouTube and on his website. Gives you an overview of of how he can construct a route. But so the first, as far as the simple planning of the first point to point is free to use, as I said. The second is called Map Enthusiast, and it's a $29.99 a year subscription, and it's very much worth it for its flexibility and use. And there are three. There's a number 3 for expedition leaders, number 4 choices for outfitters unlimited, and the expedition and the outfitters. What it does is the expedition leader can allow 1 permit alert request, and the unlimited for the outfitters, they can have, if you are trying to get a permit like in the BWCA or Quetico or someplace that you have to have a permit, you can go on there, and if the permits are all closed out for people using them, if one becomes available, then you'll get an alert. So that's the 3 and 4, but I'd recommend the Map Enthusiast. So there's lots of things you can set in many options for building your canoe route. You can select the units, whether you want statute miles or imperial units or meters. You can select the speed. There's 4 options, either average, veteran, beginner, or a custom one. And 2 years ago, he did incorporate all the Wabakimi information from our map volumes. And so that's when he put the Wabakimi area out 2 years ago, but his website has been updated since then. So I think, MJ, I'll have you go ahead and run that short video of Ben planning a simple, well, it's a point-to-point route to show you what he does, and then I'll talk a little bit more at the end.
Are you guys seeing it right now? Are you guys seeing?
Yes, it's
Okay.
up.
Very good, thanks.
I'm not hearing him. I'm not hearing his narration there.
Hey, hold on, Bill, you're saying something.
Yes, I'm not hearing his narration.
Oh, it's just music so far.
Oh, okay.
If there was narration, I don't know exactly how to get there.
Oh, yeah. Well, that isn't the video I was thinking about, where he was actually planning a multi-day route. Well, I'll
Okay,
just
I'm
say,
sorry.
that's okay. That's okay. So anyway, his tool there, as I said, you could put in parameters which you can set to your rate, whether you think you're going to be, how fast you are a paddler, if you're experienced, if you are a beginner, and how many times you want to go across a portage trail with your goods. And I always put down, you have triple times, double time, or single portaging. So I always use the triple because I carry a lot of stuff. The map backgrounds, he has choices to set up over 20 different maps that you can, like topo relief or satellite. There's a lot of different map backgrounds which your route can fit into those backgrounds. And there's ways to put in GPS coordinates. And this tool, the more you use it and the more people use it for Wabakimi, the more powerful it becomes, because as you saw on that short video there, he had pictures of campsites, pictures of portages. And so all of this is available, and you can break down your routes, your total trip, into days. You put in where you want to camp, and that's the end of one day, and it automatically computes how far you've paddled, how far you've portaged, and how long you've spent doing this. So it's very flexible that way. And there's also a travel assist feature, which I wasn't aware of until I watched some of his tutorials. So you can go into the parameters and you can use travel assist to figure how far you can get to in a certain given amount of time. So if you want to paddle for 4 hours, and you can put the route on the map, it'll show how far you can go in 4 hours. And so it's very flexible that way. It also shows where the coverage of our map booklets that Friends of Wabakimi has. And so you'll know which maps to get. It's very flexible. I found it very useful, and you can get information as to what kind of, it has links to the lakes in the Wabakimi area. Some of the lakes have been, the MNR will tell you what kind of fish are in the lake. And so it's very flexible, and it makes planning for me a lot easier to figure out how far you can go, and has all the portage links in there. It's really a powerful tool, and it'll get only better the more we use it. And that's about it. So I encourage you to go online and look at some of the videos, the tutorials he has. You'll be amazed.
Thanks, Bill. That's a lot of really great information. I've used it myself from time to time and found it very useful. You've obviously dug in a lot further than I have. I need to watch some of those instructional videos, I think. All right, Dave, if you want to talk about some things on our website that might be of use to people, starting with outfitters.
Well, we have a page, Canoeing Planning Outfitter and Resources on our website. We try to keep it up to date. So I just want to mention that two of our prime outfitters in the Armstrong area are Matisse Lake Outfitters, which has a close association with Wabakimi Air. That's Don and Annette Elliott. And they worked with the Wabakimi project for many, many years. They also have cottages you can rent for lodging the night before. Down the road from them is Bruce Heyer and the Wabakimi Canoe Outfitters and Eco Lodge. They have a B&B with lodging, full or partial outfitting. So Bruce Heyer has advised many people on how to paddle and where to go in Wabakimi, and he's a huge resource for us, and was recently honored with our Legacy Award. So those are the two main outfitters in the Armstrong area. Clem Quenville, he's is in Armstrong, and he's done a lot of shuttles for people. He shuttled Wabakimi project folks, and he shuttled me a couple times. Also provides safe parking, and he has a spot. I don't know if he has an inReach yet, but anyway, that contact information is on the website, along with information about other resources and lodging in the Armstrong area. On the Savant Lake side, there's the Four Winds Motor Hotel in Savant Lake is a place to stay, and the new owner, John, he actually shuttled us last summer, and he plans on shuttling some other people this summer. That contact information is on this page. And I haven't had a lot of contact with Rusty Myers, but they do float plane services, and they have a base just south of Savant Lake. So if anybody actually uses them for a fly-in or a fly-out, we'd like to hear about it. There's another way to access the west side of the park, just off of Highway 599. I believe there's parking available at the North Albany Fishing Lodge, where you can park for a fee and enter past Kokogan Lake right at that spot. This page, we talk about, we try and provide all the resource information we can find, including information about camping, park permits, and for those of those non-residents of Canada, how to get a Crown Land camping permit. So I'll stop there unless there's any questions.
Well, and actually, you're still on for the next one, along with Beth. And Beth, before we get started with that, are there any additional comments or questions that we need to pay attention to?
I think one was addressed. They wanted to know about whitewater schools in northwestern Ontario. And they put some resources there. There's a good question about rapids in the park and how do you find routes? How do you know where rapids will be? And I'll address that, and some others can too. Here is for sure you can read the map, and anywhere where it narrows, you can assume, you know, it's pool and drop and pool and drop. And every time it drops, there's a falls or a rapids. And so that really typifies the ecosystem there. Yeah, I think that's what I was going to say, but I'm sure some others can address that. Also, Kevlar is widely used. I had a Kevlar boat on the May trip. And we actually brought a carbon canoe on the trip. I paddled a Kevlar, and the group I was with was in a carbon boat, and just taking a little caution and going a little slower. It affects your speed, not running, you know, rapids in the carbon. The Kevlar can take class 1 bumps, class 2 bumps. It'll get scraped up, but you know, it can handle that impact. So I wouldn't hesitate to bring Kevlar unless you're really going to be running some technical or aggressive rapids. What are others' comments about figuring out where there are rapids on your route? And then the maps will be marked.
And generally from what I've heard people talk about, are the rapids are wherever they're marked on the map, the portages around them are really close to the either the beginning or the end of those rapids.
There's a question too about portages around all the rapids. Pretty much. I think Phil Cotton had a philosophy that if you could not paddle safely up the rapids, then there would be a portage. Correct me if I'm wrong about that.
That's correct.
But yes, the portages tend to be like, they did not want to carry boats any more than they have to, and Vern will attest to that. So they are as close as they can possibly be to the rapids at the beginning and at the base. So there is some paddling if you're going upstream, right up into the swirling waters. That's pretty exciting, especially around Agoki. That was really something. And then that it really helps to know ahead of time if it's going to be river left or river right. So you're not ferrying across a strong current trying to avoid the rapids.
Okay, good. Dave and Beth, if you guys would like to, Dave on the left here is the trip report form, if you want to address that, and then Beth, if you want to address the some other resources.
Yeah, we have a trip report form. I just put the link in the chat. You can get to it through our webpage, but it might be better to look at it through the Wild Apricot membership webpage. If you have a trip, please give us a trip report. We have a form on our webpage that's easy to find that we like you to use, but a narrative will do fine too. And we really like pictures. And we like descriptions that talk about where you've been and how far you went, and wildlife and portages and obstructions and challenges. And also, if you're trying to plan a trip, go to our trip forum, and there's a search. So for example, if you're interested in the Mizikau River, you could plug in Mizikau and up will pop at least 2 or possibly 3 trip reports. I've tried to put map volume indicators in the title for some of the trip reports that we put up. If you find it too difficult to enter the information yourself in the in the forum, you can just email it to info@wabakimi.org and we'll post it for you. We really like trip reports. A lot of us use those for planning, and as much detail and information as we can get in those is a huge resource for other people who are looking at trips into certain areas. Obviously, there's trip reports on bwca.com, and you can also find some on MyCCR canoe forum. And I think I saw Bruce Heyer posted some trip reports in one of his newsletters a month or so ago. So there's other places to look at trip reports too, but we try and put them into our forum so it's a resource for planning.
Very good, thank you. And Beth, the list I have on the right there probably has, it's from another resource I had, so speak to anything on there that you can.
I'm sorry, I was paying attention to chat.
Oh, sorry.
No, so I'm sorry if I repeat myself. I think the list there is really good. BWCA.com has a Wabakimi folder. And so I know there's Friends of Wabakimi monitoring that folder pretty regularly. And then myccr.com has some really good trip reports. Just keep in mind, if you're reading a trip report from 2009, it's going to be a lot different. And then there's a question I want to address here. Somebody was asking about the red numbers on the planning map, and I don't have the updated map. And Vern said they were maybe the lengths of portages. And then I also know on the new planning map, we've put on their outpost locations. So can you talk about that a little bit, MJ?
I don't have it in front of me, but the outpost locations, I can't remember the little icon that was used, but it probably looks like a cabin or something. But the outposts are scattered throughout the park, and you'll see on the planning map where those are located. And I think you were mentioning earlier, Beth, that while it could be a distraction for some, it's really a good emergency piece of knowledge in case you get yourself into a bind. And so if you had poor weather or something and you were near an outpost, you might be able to take some refuge there. Yeah, those are on the map, and they're a good resource to have on there. Beth, if you could stay with us, and Dan, if you could come on now and talk a little bit about entry and exit points and types. I've got a lot of stuff on this slide here, and this, if you can't tell, is from off of our planning map, and it's the list of entry points. And then we have some photos of people getting on and off train and some other things. So go ahead, Dan and Beth.
Go ahead, Dan.
On the entry points, for any of you folks that haven't been into Wabakimi, there's limited access in comparison.
Did we lose you, Dan? Are you cutting out?
There are only a few road access areas. I should speak on this.
Is everyone else getting Dan cutting in and out? Vern, could you respond to me?
Yes, she's cutting out.
Okay, thank you. Dan, I'm going to kind of take over for you right now. Hopefully I'll get what you want me to get. Okay, the entry points are quite limited when you compare it to other places that you might have traveled to. You go to the Boundary Waters or Quetico, you can drive up to the entry point with your car and park it there for a week while you go off. And that's not true in Wabakimi. Very few places it would be recommended to do that. And there are very few places where there might be a place to actually park your vehicle. So relying on shuttles, by vehicle might be the way to get in there. And there are people like Dave mentioned before, like Clem, who will take you to an entry point if it's, not too far away. But other than that, you can get there by train, and on our planning map, that train is listed across, well, I'm going to say across the bottom, but it's not exactly the bottom, but there's a black line going east-west, and with the points of drop-off for entry points into Wabakimi. And there's a schedule that you can go to, the rail access information. You can go to find out where those are and which points you're getting off at. You have to get your tickets in advance, or pay for your tickets in advance, and you need to let them know where you're going to be dropped off or picked up. And the train used to have a schedule that was a little bit more frequent and a little bit more regular than it is now. But since COVID, it hasn't been quite as reliable. But it is still in action, and will take people, and they'll take your stuff and put it in the train and drop you off at the point and pick you up there. But you do have to be very flexible. So if you have a flexible schedule for getting in and out, then the train might be a good way to save some money and get into where you want to go. And the last one is by plane. We mentioned earlier two outfitters that can fly you to anywhere, in the park or in the Crown Lands, and you just need to make the arrangements with them. And that is, of course, a costly thing, but it is well worth the money, I think, because personally, just because of the view you get and, the overall experience of it. So, Beth, you want to chime in on anything that I've forgotten?
No, I wasn't listening.
Okay.
Chat is busy.
Okay, well, why don't we move to that, because this is actually the last of the items of our presentation. So why don't we move to the chat and the Q&A?
There's some questions about the use of GPS maps for Wabakimi, and there's been some very good responses there. I use a Garmin InReach, and I just use the EarthMate app on my phone, and I'm able to pair them and used GPS that way. The outfitters can provide maps. Bruce provides very good maps, excellent maps that are up to date, along with planning as part of his service that you pay for. And our expedition committee has members that will help email you back and forth as far as planning, and also more questions about GPS, but there are some really good responses in chat. The float planes, so there's beavers and otters, and the otters can carry 2 boats, and the beaver can carry 1. So the beaver will strap down, and you can take a 3-person canoe, and everyone can fit on the beaver, or the otter can take the 2 boats. And then we traveled on the second trip on an otter, and there were 5 large men with all their week's fishing gear and alcohol staying at an outpost, and then our party of 3 and 2 boats all on one otter, plus the pilot and an assistant. So pretty, it can carry a pretty big load. There's a question too about, is the park more crowded? And I really think that's a relative term. MJ and I were talking, I think that when you design this trip, maybe it'll be your bucket list trip, or especially if you're coming from Toronto area, it's a far distance. I think you really set your objectives for the trip. And if you are just set on never seeing anybody at all, then maybe you want to reach out to one of the Friends of Wabakimi board members or members about really setting up that trip. and look at the map and then stay away from the outposts. As I said, though, my experience was on the second trip, well, on the first trip too, we were really glad to see an outpost. We used the lawn just to rest on one occasion. The other point is that you can't have it all. You know, you can't have easy access, low cost, no crowds, and a highway portage with nobody on it without crowds. So you gotta, if you want remote, you kind of got to work for it and be prepared that you're going to cross some really hellish portages and then all of a sudden see a float plane land with a fishing party. That may be your reality. So I think just knowing that ahead of time, you can kind of gear yourself up for what type of experience you may have. One other question there's a lot of good questions, but Vern, could you address greater length, the benefit of using Lawrence Mills maps?
Well, I'll probably go into too much detail, but the project, Wabakimi project spent a lot of time, a lot of energy mapping and detailing all those routes across both Crown Land and the park. But for a variety of reasons, we've lost the ability to update that map. And so what we're doing is working very closely with Lawrence Mills, who has had his own mapping process. And what we're doing is incorporating the information that was gathered during the Wabakimi project phase into Lawrence's maps, which we now will be able to update and modify and change and keep current. And so MJ and I did an analysis of all the maps that the Wabakimi project had put together and ones that Lawrence had done and figured out where the gaps are. And now we're working very closely with Lawrence to try and fill in those gaps. And MJ kind of made, actually MJ did most of this work, but she made reference to the fact that the west side of the park on the Crown Land, which is in the Caribou Forest, was not in Lawrence Mills's map selection. And so Lawrence has been working with us to incorporate that into his format. And so at some point in time, hopefully all that information that was gathered by Phil and all those volunteers will be incorporated into Lawrence's format, and then we'll have the ability to update and maintain it as we go forward. I'm hoping I'm hopefully addressing, I think it was Maurice that asked the question, and maybe he might want to expand upon that, but it's been a great partnership with Lawrence. We're maintaining a lot of information and we're putting it in a format that we can now update going forward.
It's going to be very good too. And we will, I think we're planning on having a short webinar all about that before too long.
Another question I want to bring to the attention of the FOW members here is a question we get commonly at the expo and the booths and stuff. Why is it not safe to park the car?
I'll take a swing if you want. These are just incredibly remote areas. I mean, the Boundary Waters, you know, the St. Louis County Sheriff will drive up and down it, and there's some people there's a lot of attention. These are just incredibly remote areas, and it's if your car is left there for an extended period of time and there isn't an officer going in and out of there, I wouldn't leave my car parked on a county road in Iowa for an extended period of time. I think you just need to be aware of the situation. And don't put yourself in harm's way, because that car might be just perfectly fine. But again, there's not a lot of officers out there patrolling those remote back areas. I'm sure other people have other insight. I'd be happy to hear that.
I think another reason too, along with the remoteness, is there's just simply not big parking lots. Like, you know, you go to Boundary Waters to the Brule entry point and it can fit 52 trucks and trailers. It's not like that there. Absolutely. If you have a question from the audience and you wish to speak up, MJ can open up when it's appropriate, open it up for questions. Sure.
It's open.
Go ahead,
this-
Berlin.
Yeah, this is Berlin. I have a question here. MJ, on your committee, do you have a written document that describes in some detail the routes or areas that really need more work and more data about the route itself? or maybe you've already categorized them in different groups. So, I mean, is that information available to somebody like me who would like to take on some interesting route that people don't go on very often, and check it out? Is that available?
Good question. We every year we've at least the last 2 years, we've just tried to establish areas of interest that we want more information about. Last year, I think we had about 8 routes listed, and I don't know, David have to tell me if that is still posted anywhere. I'm not sure. But this year, we basically said that that western side is the area that we really want more information on. Otherwise, what we really want people to do is any route that they decide to take, give us the trip report on it and let us know if there are things that, from the maps that you have gotten through us, let us know if there are some discrepancies. And then do it any kind of, you're not really allowed to take chainsaws in and so forth, but you can take hand saws in, and if you are able to and willing to do some clearing, by all means, have at it. So that's kind of where we're at this point.
Thank you.
MJ,
Yes.
hopefully I can hold together here with my weak internet. We had pointed out we were going to speak about a little bit about bushwhacking.
Yeah.
And a lot of folks may not be used to that with boundary waters. You're required to stay in campsites, and in Wabakimi, you're encouraged to use campsites, but you can also bushwhack campsite. But I just wanted to point out to folks that go up there, if it may be their first time, and that I don't see it in a lot of the information on Wabakimi, but from the time from May to August, they don't want you to be in the islands, in areas where the caribou calving is going on at that time. That's a trait for that animal, that they drop their calves on islands, and then they're able to, anyways. So that was one thing I wanted to make sure that got brought up, is that the caribou don't take our pressure very well, and especially if we're on their calving islands. But when you do bushwhack, if you have to do a campsite and you're not used to doing that, just remember to keep those certain things in mind, that you're looking for a good landing, enough tent pads, and a kitchen area. And just remember, if you are somebody that cooks with open fire, that you've got to find bedrock. Phil was really adamant about that he never wanted to find a fire circle on anything but bedrock, because if fire does get into that piece,
I'll finish that statement for him.
it could be burning. You don't even.
Dan, you're breaking up. If you can hear me, I'm going to try to finish your statement. So that was one of the things I learned on one of my first trips into to Wabakimi. There was a campsite we landed on that was established, and we weren't building a fire, and I just didn't understand, why can't we build a fire? And they said, because there's no bedrock here. If we build a fire on here, then even if you think you've put out the fire really well, it can go through into the roots and into the ground and break out into a fire, someplace else, nearby. So that's a very good point. I'm glad that you brought that up, Dan, and about the calving too.
Can I add something?
Yes.
Okay, this is Ken. As far as if you're on a sandy campsite with no bedrock, Phil one time had us dig a pit about 1.5 foot square and line it with rocks on all 4 sides and on the bottom, and then we could cook with a fire in that little pit. And if you're on the first campsite on Atwood Lake, coming out of the Shabasquaya River on the bluff, you will find that little pit there where we had fires a couple times. The other thing about bushwhacking is it's not encouraged to bushwhack a trail. When Phil put in all the portages, he researched them extensively for all winter for the next season. And these are portages that existed in history, whether they were native portages, trappers, explorers, whatever, but they had been there. And Phil never wanted us to just stab through the woods and go from lake to lake or whatever. We had to find evidence. And sometimes there was evidence and it wasn't convenient, so we did take a little side trip, but for the most part, we stuck to historical routes. Someone was asking about going or landing in a lake and then coming out. So it seems that no one's ever been in there. And I looked at the map, and this lake was situated such that no one would ever go in there because there was nowhere to go once you were there. And a route always goes through a lake to another lake or to a river. And I discouraged it. It could have been a caribou calving site. You never know. But, you stick to the routes that there are. There's plenty of them. You could travel for 60 years and never see the same spot. So that's my thoughts on bushwhacking a trail. Thanks.
Thanks, Ken.
I wonder if we should throw in the sensitive areas, Red Sand, Dalton. No,
Yes,
you're unmuted.
yes.
Any other questions?
Oh, can I add a comment about the one that asked about thunder boxes? You can also go back in the woods, find some deep moss, kick it aside, do your duty, and cover it up with the moss again. The moss can be up to a foot thick. That's the best way to get rid of stuff. Thank you.
Hi, MJ, can you hear me?
Yes.
I just want to point out, it was a very good point that was made on caribou calving by Dan. The other thing I just wanted to mention is that through the park naturalist and also through the conservation officer of FLW, we are very, very interested in sightings with coordinates from wherever you see a caribou or another species at risk, such as a wolverine. People are aware that we're actively looking at all the resource extraction surrounding the park, and we know that wildlife does not quite understand the borders of a park. So we're always very, very concerned about, especially the species at risk. But we need to know where they are. They're very difficult to actually track from the air when we have done some surveys, but canoeists see them all the time. Everybody likes to take a photo, but we don't know where that place was, where they captured it. So we have to be very specific. As an example, when we're having discussions with MNRF and forestry management plans, when we're talking to the park biologist, when we are looking at park management plans, we have to be very, very specific in terms of where we see these animals.
So by specific, do you mean GPS point, or do you
Yes.
mean on this lake, or what?
Well, you can make it as simple as you want. If you use some of the apps that people are using, like the park naturalists would like us to use, like there's Plant Snap and there's, I forget what the other one is, iNaturalist or something. Yes,
Yeah.
that will actually take the coordinates already. So you can just submit the photo onto the app, and it will have the coordinates there.
Very good. Okay, other questions or comments?
I just wanted to bring up one thing that was mentioned a little bit earlier. I put it on the chat. It's just that one thing I find about group trips going to Wabakimi is a lot of times people don't spend enough time with the group dynamic aspect in their planning. So I think it's very, very critical that people talk about what their expectations are. Sometimes you can get into group dynamics where you have some very, very fit people who like to do, 5-7 kilometers an hour, versus other people who aren't so fit and have other priorities. Like they like to swim, they like to fish, they like to enjoy the actual beauty of the area and not have to look at their trip when they come back and look at videos to see what they missed. So there's a lot of group dynamics that should take place before you leave at the planning stage, to make sure you're on the same page about what kind of experience you're looking for. One of the reasons for that is you're traveling a long distance. So when you get there, you want to make sure you're all on board of what it is you want to achieve.
Very good points. Thank you.
MJ?
Yes.
I wanted to make a comment along those lines. We had a discussion a few weeks ago also about the sacredness of parts of the park, if not all of it, but recognizing that First Nations have used these lands for hundreds of years, thousands of years. The pictographs, certain areas are are like churches. And to think of that, and then to enter these areas with that knowledge, and then treat it with accordingly with respect. You may also come across grave markers, relics, and so forth. And I think just to keep in mind that you're out there in this big wilderness, and it just seems like, what will it matter if I do X and X? But it's part of the leave no trace ethic, and certainly Friends of Wabakimi wants to promote that.
Yes, you're right. Thank you.
And that's a good point, Beth. At the Toronto Outdoor Show, I had a young man who was trying to promote himself as a canoe trip leader for Wabakimi, and he was very excited that he had found a very, very large campsite on Whitewater Lake. And he said, "This is great for my business because I could put a large group on there." And he said, "It's not on any of your documents as a campsite." And after a few questions with him, I knew exactly what he was talking about, because it's the summer and fall fishing and hunting area of the Whitewater First Nations. They go there as a community, and it's not a campsite. So sometimes you have to, you find something like that, be aware that it probably isn't for us to be camping there. It belongs to the local Indigenous community, like our First Nations. They were there first.
I see a last question from a wind perspective. Is it generally easier to plan trips from west to east? Anybody want to respond to that?
I'd like to respond to that.
Okay.
Well, it is, as far as wind is concerned, better to go from west to east. And the other thing is that, and this was a comment someone made about our map books, that the direction of flow isn't shown, but all the rivers, pretty much all the rivers in Wabakimi either go south to north, north of the tracks, to one of three rivers, the Albany, the Ogoki, or what's the other one? The Atwood. And those rivers flow west to east. So the direction of travel is always either south to north or west to east along those three rivers. Phil set up our map book so that the first map would be near the source of a river, and the last map in the book would be near the end of the river, such that you could follow it along from map to map. Each map would lead to another map. Someone was asking whether we could put marks on the map to show that you could go into another river from here. And that wasn't his plan, because once you go onto another river system, you cannot get back later on. And you could be 30 miles downstream and then find out, uh-oh, I can't get back to my car, or I can't get back to the railroad tracks or whatever. So he set it up so you could take river systems with its tributaries or whatever and stay on that river system. But generally travel is north of the tracks, it's south to north and west to east.
Very good. Thank you. All right. Any other questions or comments? We should probably wrap this up.
MJ, I got one comment, just to remember to respect the wilderness. Leave no trace, no building chairs and stuff like that. Just kind of leave it like it is.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Very good point. Thank you. Okay, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us. We had a really good audience and a lot of contributions through the chat, which really assisted us in the presentation. And a big thank you to the presenters for their time and efforts. Have a good one until we see each other again.
MJ, well done. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And thanks to everybody.
I want to say hi to Art and Dan. Hi, Art. Hi, Dan.
I see.
Thank you, MJ.
Leona is doing a parade wave.
Stop your record now, MJ.
Okay. All right. And then this has been recorded and will be posted on the website at some place. I'm not sure what page. Dave, what page will it be on?
On our webinar page.
Okay,
on,
that's right.
And on the YouTube channel.
Okay, very good.
And on our Facebook page.
Sounds like a plan. Okay, thank you very much. See you all.
Stop record.